Close your eyes for a second and imagine a household that keeps borrowing every month, not to build assets but to pay yesterday's bills. For a while, life looks normal. Then one day, the interest itself becomes unaffordable. Nations collapse the same way households do, slowly, politely, and with impressive paperwork. The FRBM Act was India's attempt to interrupt that quiet slide. At its core, the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, enacted in 2003 and operationalized from 2004, is not a dry fiscal statute. It is a moral document disguised as financial law. It asks a simple but uncomfortable question of the state: how much can you spend today without stealing from tomorrow? Before FRBM, India's fiscal policy had a habit of drifting. Deficits widened year after year, borrowing became routine, and the line between productive expenditure and political generosity blurred. High fiscal deficits meant higher borrowing. Higher borrowing pushed up interest rates. Higher interest rates crowded out private investments. Growth suffered, inflation simmered, and future taxpayers quietly inherited the bill. FRBM emerged from this macroeconomic mess as an attempt to inject discipline, predictability, and transparency into public finances. The Act lays down a framework rather than a micromanaged formula. It does not tell the government where to spend, but it tells the government how responsibly it must behave while spending. This distinction is crucial. FRBM respects democratic choice but insists on fiscal sanity. One of the most important ideas embedded in the Act is fiscal deficit control. Fiscal deficit is the gap between the government's total expenditure and its total non-borrowed receipts. In plain language, it is how much the government lives beyond its means. The original FRBM framework mandated a phased reduction of fiscal deficit to a sustainable level. Over time, targets have evolved, but the spirit remains constant. Deficit should not become a lifestyle. Closely linked is the concept of revenue deficit, which measures the gap between revenue expenditure and revenue receipts. Revenue expenditure is consumption, which includes salaries, subsidies, interest payments. Borrowing to invest in infrastructure can be justified. Borrowing to pay salaries indefinitely cannot. FRBM sought to eliminate revenue deficit, forcing the government to borrow only for capital expenditure that creates future growth. This was subtle but powerful ethical nudge. Debt should build assets, not laziness. Another key provision is transparency in fiscal operations. The Act mandates the government to place before Parliament a set of fiscal statements along with the Union budget. These include the Medium-Term Fiscal Policy Statement, Fiscal Policy Strategy Statement, and Macroeconomic Framework Statement. These documents convert budget making from an annual spectacle into a medium-term commitment. The government is compelled to explain not just what it plans to do this year, but where it is heading over the next few years and why. Transparency here is not about paperwork, it is about accountability. When targets are declared in advance, deviations demand explanation. When assumptions are stated openly, economic storytelling becomes harder. FRBM assumes that sunlight, even in fiscal policy, is a disinfectant. The Act also restricts the government's ability to borrow directly from the Reserve Bank of India except under exceptional circumstances. This provision matters deeply. Borrowing from the central bank is the fiscal equivalent of printing money. It may solve immediate problems but usually ends in inflation. By drawing a line between the government's wallet and the RBI's printing press, FRBM reinforces institutional discipline and protects monetary stability. Of course, reality does not always cooperate with rules. Wars, pandemics, financial crises, and natural disasters do not consult fiscal targets before arriving. Recognizing this, the FRBM Act allows for escape clauses. Under specified conditions such as national security threats or severe economic downturns, fiscal targets may be relaxed. This is not a loophole. It is a recognition that rigidity in public finance can be as dangerous as irresponsibility. Discipline must have a brain, not just a spine. Over the years, the FRBM framework has evolved. Committees have recommended recalibrations, shifting focus from rigid numbers to debt sustainability. The emphasis has moved towards keeping public debt within manageable limits relative to GDP. This evolution reflects maturity. Fiscal responsibility is not about fetishing a number, it is about preserving the state's capacity to act when it truly must. Beyond economics, FRBM carries a quite ethical lesson. Every rupee borrowed today is a claim on future citizens who had no voice in today's budget debates. Fiscal irresponsibility is intergenerational injustice. The Act reminds policymakers that governance is a trusteeship, not a spending spree. For us, the FRBM is best understood not as a technical law but as a constitutional companion. It strengthens democratic accountability without amending the Constitution. It disciplines power without undermining it. It recognizes that sovereignty without responsibility is merely sanctioned recklessness. When you think of FRBM Act, do not picture balance sheets alone. Picture a contract between generations, a promise that ambition will be matched with restraint and welfare with wisdom. In a democracy that loves to spend and hate to tax, such a promise is neither glamorous nor popular, but it is indispensable.